Hello, and you are listening to EcoJustice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. EcoJustice Radio acknowledges that we record the show on the traditional territory of the Tongva and all of their relatives. Welcome, I am Jack Ide. On today's show on mountain lions, how to embrace our wild predatory relatives, we will air parts of a documentary series called California Mountain Lions, Legends of California by the UC Davis Karen C. Dreyer Wildlife Health Center. We'll also include sections from an interview our host Jessica Aldridge did with Beth Pratt, California Regional Executive Director of the National Wildlife Federation. And furthermore, I will share from indigenous folk stories and myths about the importance of predators like coyotes, big cats, or their southern relatives, the jaguar. In this industrialized country, we have had a war on wild, what we call, quote, predators, helicopter gunners, shooting wolves to, quote, protect caribou herds in Alaska, or taking them out in Idaho to benefit elk, but really to benefit the human hunters who prey on the elk. Every day is open season on mountain lions in Nevada. The majestic cats are under attack as prey for hunters, as unintended victims of traps set for bobcats, and as the primary target of a $900,000 a year state-sponsored effort to cull species deemed problematic by the state. Between 2000 and 2021, at least 4,229 mountain lions were killed in Nevada by hunters, trappers, and the state's lethal removal effort, according to data from the Nevada Department of Wildlife. According to author George Werthner, without exception, state game and fish agencies do not treat predators like other wildlife. Even though state agencies are no longer engaged in outright extermination of predators, persecution and limited acceptance of ecological role of predators is still the dominant attitude. State wildlife agencies only tolerate predators as long as they are not permitted to play a meaningful ecological role. In California, scientists have completed a comprehensive estimate of mountain lions, a vital statistic needed to shape the puma-friendly land use decisions and ensure that the predators can find room to roam, mate, and find prey. As reported in the LA Times, the total number of mountain lions is estimated to be between 3,200 and 4,500, which is thousands fewer than previously thought. The count was conducted by state and university scientists who used GPS collar data and genetic information from scat samples to model population densities across the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Mojave Desert, and the Southern California's patchwork of wilderness. Humans, all of us, you and I, we're the greatest threat to mountain lions. In California, close to 40 million people live within or adjacent to cougar habitat. I myself have encountered them on the trail several times, and of course, we moved on quickly, and the cougars really were happy about that, but they certainly didn't bother me. Mountain lions as a species are not listed as endangered, but generally speaking, vehicle strikes, rat poison, inbreeding, wildfires, poaching, urban encroachment complaints, livestock depredation, kill permits, and freeway systems are all contributing to what scientists call an extinction vortex. The attitude of many hunters, land managers, and homeowners towards predators is not appreciably different than what was heard maybe 100 years ago, despite the huge leap in our ecological understanding of the role of top predators in the ecosystem. Predators have profound effects, in fact, on those ecosystems. They forage through forests, dispersing rich nutrients and seeds, which help grow beneficial plants that attract more wildlife. And by controlling the numbers of their prey, like deer and elk, who in numbers can decimate creeks and wetlands, they can help increase the health of those streams and the biodiversity, an effect known as trophic cascades. This has been documented in Yellowstone National Park with the reintroduction of the gray wolf, who reduced the density of elk herds and brought back beavers and their dams, which had resulted in healthy creeks. Regrettably, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services ignores the positive role that predators play in their surrounding habitat, as demonstrated through their reckless practice of killing large number of predators. And for state wildlife agencies, wolves, mountain lions, bears, and other predators are a direct threat to their budgets because top predators eat the very animals that hunters want to kill because state wildlife agencies rely upon license sales to fund their operations. Maintaining huntable numbers of elk, deer, moose, and caribou is in the agency's self-interest. In today's show, we want to discuss the efforts to protect predators, particularly the mountain lion, who are still somewhat numerous but declining fast in the world of sprawling housing developments and freeways. First, we will air parts of a documentary series called California Mountain Lions, Legend of California by UC Davis, Karen C. Dreyer Wildlife Center. Featured speakers are Walter Boyce from UC Davis, Dave Garcelon from the Institute of Wildlife Studies, T. Winston Vickers, a veterinarian from UC Davis, and Jessica Sanchez from the SoCal Puma Project.
In California, the mountain lion is something of a local celebrity. Elusive and mysterious, it's like a secret neighbor that's often talked about but seldom seen. Unfortunately, scientists have discovered that some populations are threatened. In this series, we will learn the keys to understanding these beautiful and essential animals and how we can coexist with this legend of California. Mountain lions are a vital part of California's ecosystem and exist in every part of the state. From the coasts and the Sierras to the southern deserts and the northern redwoods. By using motion capture cameras and GPS collars, we can take a closer look into the lives of these lions. The mountain lion is a legend with many names: cougar, puma, and panther, just to name a few. In fact, mountain lions have more names than any other species in the world, which only adds to their storied presence. There are three major threats to California mountain lions: car accidents, genetic isolation, and depredation permits. Even though California is the only state where pumas are protected from sport hunting, depredation permits allow them to be shot if they've killed livestock or pets. Car accidents happen when lions try to cross a major highway. They try to cross in order to maintain their large territory or to discover a new home. Mountain lions are considered apex predators and reign supreme at the top of the food chain. The adult male is a powerful animal, often measuring over 8 feet long and weighing up to 200 pounds. Their front paws are equipped with 5 retractable claws, ready to strike in an instant. They can kill their prey with a single bite to the back of the neck. Mountain lions feed primarily on deer, although females will eat smaller prey, anything from coyotes to wood rats. Their leftovers are an important food source for birds and smaller animals. In order to survive, a lion must remain fierce in the face of confrontation, but also know when to strategically retreat. With full bellies, pumas will then bury their meals, an instinct called caching. They will then return to feed for up to a week, getting the most they can out of the animal. In spite of popular belief, mountain lions do not roar. Instead, they have many different ways of communicating. A mother makes chirping sounds to collect her wandering offspring. Whistles, growls, purrs, and chirps are some of the few sounds cougars can make. A female will give birth to a litter of 2 to 4 kittens who will stay with her for 1 to 2 years. After the kittens are strong enough to walk on their own, Mum will teach them how to hunt. Even as they become more confident in their survival skills, kittens are still vulnerable to threats, which can be anything from coyotes and bears to an encounter with an adult male of their own kind. The abundant presence of humans means that California lions live with high risk. Crossing freeways, being the targets of depredation permits, or experiencing a slow decline from habitat loss, isolation, and inbreeding. Mountain lion attacks on humans are extremely rare. As naturally solitary creatures, they prefer to avoid humans at all costs. In this series, we eradicate harmful myths about lions and hope to ensure the survival of their species. It's important to learn as much as we can about these legendary creatures. California's ecosystem exists in a delicate equilibrium. It's crucial to understand how each species participates in our local circle of life. As a top predator, mountain lions play a huge role, so it's critical to collect as much data as we can to ensure their survival for future generations.
So much of science kind of de-individualizes whatever it is we're studying. And one thing I love about studying lions is that we get to know them as individuals and we get to know them as a population. So how do we get to know them as individuals? Well, one is that we actually capture them and put these collars on that allow us to track them and see where they're going.
There is a careful process to capturing wild lions. The first step is locating them. Scientists will go into an area to look for tracks and set up trail cameras. These cameras help determine how frequently the lions are present. Once their presence is confirmed, a trap is prepared, which can be walk-through cages, the use of hounds, or bait.
So we use roadkill deer that we are able to get from the state and have permission to be able to use those. And we'll go into that area where we found the tracks and wire that deer to a tree. And then we put a camera on it, a trail camera, so we can get some indication of what lion it is that comes in. And we also attach a transmitter to it. And so that way when the lion comes in and starts tugging away on that deer to try to eat it, and he's moving it around, he pulls a little trip on the transmitter and we get a signal knowing that we have a lion there. We go back in with a big cage trap. They're about 5 feet long and about 2 or 3 feet wide and high. And we put the cage trap right where we had the carcass that it was feeding on. And then we take that deer carcass that it's already been eating, we dice it up into sections and wire that to the back of the trap.
When the trapdoor closes, an alert notifies the scientists that a lion has been caught. This usually happens at night, when the lion is most active and searching for food. The scientists then begin a workup, which is similar to a procedure at the hospital. However, dealing with these patients is not as simple.
Well, the first thing we have to do, of course, is the mountain lion is not going to be real happy with us just fiddling with it, so we have to anesthetize it first.
The sedated lion is then carried to the predetermined workup area, and special care is taken to ensure the lion's safety.
And we have a patient monitor, so we can hook it up the same as you would have an animal in a hospital or a human in a hospital.
It is during the workup that scientists are able to gather important data about the lion's health. Body measurements are taken to determine the lion's age. A good estimate comes from measuring the wear and tear on its teeth.
We have an ear tag in them and a tattoo of their ear, and that way, when their collar drops off, either because we command it to fall off or it's reached at the end of its life, then if that animal is ever caught in the future, we can either see the tattoo in its ear or the ear tag and know who it is. By collecting data on things like the blood that gives us the genetics, we can look at how the mountain lion populations are interacting. The health information will let us know what diseases are these animals exposed to, and in some cases, if they don't show any exposure to certain diseases, that's actually more of a risk, because if that disease comes in there, they have no antibodies to be able to fight it off.
So we genotype these lions and we know every individual by its DNA. And then by studying their DNA, we understand how this lion is related to this lion. And we've been doing this work long enough now that we know 4 generations of lions. These lions all have told me stories as they've gone through their life, and I've followed their movements, maybe remotely through a computer, maybe in the field, but also through molecular biology. And we can see who was successful. Who did you mate with? Oh, so that time those 2 dots came close together on a map, this male and this female, this youngster was a result. DNA has given us the ability to understand families. Prior to starting to study mountain lions, I'd seen 3 in my entire life. And it was always a glimpse as they moved across a road at dusk or at night in some backcountry area. So if that's your only view of lions, what can you say from that? Well, a lion was here and it was going that way or it was going this way. But what we really need to know is how many lions are there? Are they established here as residents? Or are they passing through?
Scientists are unsure of the exact number of lions in California. However, in certain areas, studies have shown that their populations are at risk.
Everybody has to have the same information. So to me, that's my role. That's our role with this project, is to provide information and make it available to everyone. It's the common currency that allows you to then make decisions based on your own values or your own perspective.
Only with access to accurate information can we ensure that mountain lions continue to live and thrive as California's feline royalty. For the California mountain lion, when it comes to love, romance can be fleeting. They have the same needs as any other animal, and to reproduce, they can't do it alone. Continuing the species can be a challenge with many obstacles. However, it's an essential part of the circle of life. When the female is ready to mate, she has her own special siren song to lure in potential suitors.
When she wants to attract a male, when she comes into heat, then she vocalizes. And their vocalizing can be quite loud sometimes. Many people have equated the vocalizing of a female mountain lion in heat to a woman screaming.
Sometimes you have to be loud to get attention.
When they go through the breeding process, they usually are together up to a week, and they breed multiple times during that period. When the female then breeds and has the kittens, they're with her for 1.5 years, approximately on average. And so that means that the breeding opportunities for the male and the female only occur every couple of years.
She goes through a pregnancy period of 90 days and then has between 2 and 4 kittens on average. When the kittens are born, Mom will nurse them for about 12 weeks, but to keep her energy high, she occasionally has to leave them and search for food. After they're weaned, Mom will either bring small prey to her young or will lead them to a kill site. She will repeat this process until the babies are old enough to accompany her on a hunt. They will learn all of their survival skills from Mom and pass those skills down to kittens of their own.
Well, the mother and the kittens have a very close relationship because the female takes care of those kittens for essentially 1.5 years, which is a long time for offspring to be dependent on or circulate with a mother among animals, among wild animals. So the mothers are very good mothers.
Father, however, rarely plays a part in the kitten's upbringing.
Except when they mate, they stay apart from each other, and actually a female will do everything she can to avoid a male. Intraspecific conflict is a big deal in lions. Male lions will kill other male lions, and male lions will even kill female lions. So females basically avoid a male unless she wants to mate with him.
In a few rare instances, father will join mother and kittens for a family meal. Unfortunately, adult males are far from being the only threat to young kittens. On average, fewer than half of all kittens survive to adulthood.
Well, as real young kittens, they're susceptible to predation from a number of other animals. And Environmental threats include hypothermia from sudden snowstorms. They can be threatened by fire. Wildfire, of course, is a threat throughout California, and they may not be able to move away from it.
This period of susceptibility is quite a long time for a mother to protect her kittens, but she stays determined. However, Mom will only give her kittens a free ride for so long before they must learn to fend for themselves.
They are completely dependent on her for that first year and a half of life, and then they get booted out, more or less. She's going to have another litter, and it's time for them to go establish their own territory. And they don't have GPS, they don't have maps, and this is when they end up in places where they shouldn't. They don't have a clock or a compass to tell them when or where to go. They just go in random directions.
Setting out on their own is a big life adjustment for the young lions, one which males and females handle differently. For both, their first priority is finding a new and sustaining territory.
Males have a larger territory typically than females. They tend to have territories that butt up against each other, but they mark their territories with urine or feces.
Females, on the other hand, set up their territories closer to their mothers. This can negatively affect the diversity of the local gene pool.
The females, because they can come into heat sooner, they may even breed back to their father in some cases, especially in cases where the territories are limited by geography. In our study area and others in California, oftentimes the populations are squeezed by development and roads. The males end up overlapping a lot with their offspring because the offspring cannot go very far to set up their own territory, the female offspring.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you are listening to On Mountain Lions, How to Embrace Our Wild Predatory Relatives. I'm your host, Jack Eit, and we are featuring a documentary on California mountain lions, as well as indigenous stories on the ecological role of top predators, and excerpts from our interview with Beth Pratt from the National Wildlife Federation. Next, I will share from Indigenous Stories and Mythology about the importance of predators. The first story is from the Old Man Coyote cycle from the Crow people of Montana, more known as the Absalica. We have these stories, as the indigenous people did, to teach about the relationship between creative forces like the sun, who is also known as Old Man Coyote in the guise of the trickster predator, to the sacred mountains and waters down to the people themselves. This is from The Myths and Traditions of the Crow Indians, Robert H. Lowy, published by University of Nebraska Press, compiled from informants of the Absalica or Crow people. Old Man Coyote was very hungry. He came to some buffalo. "Let us run a race." They agreed to a race. This happened near a big cliff which was hard to see. Coyote said, "Now, when we come to that high place, we'll all shut our eyes and see who gets there first." They started a race. When they came to the place, he told them to shut their eyes. They fell over the cliff. He walked in a circle, came down the trail, and lay on one side of them. He made his nose bleed and feigned moaning. One young buffalo who had hurt his back in falling over said, "Old Man Coyote, if I get up, I'll fix you. You've killed us. If I happen to live, I'll fix you. You're always in mischief." Coyote went and killed the buffalo, skinned him, and carried meat away. He had plenty. "I wonder where Chirape is," who is his younger brother. "He must be very hungry. I have lots of meat." Chirape ate with him, and he sent Chirape on an errand. Old Man Coyote was there. A wolf came, and Old Man Coyote hit him with the buffalo muscle so that he went off crying. "You go and cry all you want and get all the wolves to come here and eat everything. Just leave the part of the blanket that I can hold." The wolf went and called his mates. Old Man Coyote divided the meat. "This fox will eat this, and I'll eat this," he said, and continued in this way. Wolf had got to the other wolves who asked why he was crying. They were very angry. We'll beg the small animals to do the work for us. They took a cocoon and got the spider. See what you can do for us. They explained the case, and he said, there's nothing hard in that. Spider made a web and caught a cocoon. He went through the air and let down the cocoon on the back of Old Man Coyote's neck while he was cooking. Spider listened. He's sleeping now and can't do anything. Now ravens, magpies, and other animals came and ate up all the meat and all the blanket except a piece small enough for him to hold. He woke up and found only this part of the robe left. All the meat he had was eaten up. He was helpless. This is basically a story about there's meat for everyone. That's what predation is about. It's not about one predator. It's about the entire ecosystem. Next, we offer excerpts from an interview our host Jessica Aldridge did with Beth Pratt, California Executive Director of the National Wildlife Federation.
Beth, the plight of the mountain lion, a creature that you are very familiar with, is a story that is popular. In the state of California, mountain lions cannot be hunted for sport, and the state also is recommending to place them on the Californian Endangered Species Act. Why is this so important? And do you think that we will see the extinction of mountain lions in our lifetime, or will this be more of a for localized populations? But as we've said before in the conversation, that there's these ripple effects that happen to overall populations. So if you could just expand upon this.
Yeah, I think there's so many sort of layers to this. But what we do know is this fragmentation in many areas. And there's a great map that Justin Dellinger, who is the biologist that works on the Mountain Lion Project for California Department of Fish and Wildlife, sort of took a number of studies like the Santa Monica Mountain one, like the ones in Santa Cruz, like the ones in the Santa Anas by Winston Vickers, and made a genetic map of the different populations in California. Up in the Sierra here, doing pretty good. They have a lot of genetic diversity, a lot of space, but anything sort of south of Santa Cruz, all the way down to the border, you got little, really isolated genetic populations. And so that is what's concerning. And I would say that if those go, then that's where over time, the ripple effect, then the populations even doing well don't have more mountain lions to pull from that would travel. So that's where this ESA, it's not just about the local disappearing, but that could then have ripple effects, at least over time with the entire population. Endangered Species Act. And again, back to California being very progressive and really wanting to protect its wild heritage.
Yes.
There's obviously the Federal Endangered Species Act. And I always like to say that was a very much a bipartisan, both sides of the aisle coming together. Richard Nixon signed that. Can you even conceive today of that coming from a Republican? No, but Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan was instrumental in mountain lion protections here. So I don't know where we lost, wildlife being a sort of come together moment. But so there's the Federal Endangered Species Act, but California has its own. And that's great for news for the gray wolf, right? So they're not, obviously we're looking at the wolf slaughter going on right now because they're off the federal protection list. California, they're protected here. So we're come here, come to California. So that's where the endangered species comes in. We both have federal protections, but California has its own level.
That's great.
Here's another excerpt from documentary series called California Mountain Lions, Legends of California by UC Davis, Karen C. Dreyer, Wildlife Health Center.
The mountain lions of California are an incredibly adaptable species. They can live in almost all parts of the state as long as there are adequate resources available. The mountain lion's elusive nature has shrouded them in mystery. Fortunately, many have made their secret homes in the Golden State. Even though lions can live anywhere food is available, a number of additional challenges arise with each unique California landscape.
In
In the low desert, there's relatively low levels of prey, so they have to circulate over much larger physical areas to acquire enough food. Up in the high Sierras, they have to deal with snow. They have to deal with other restrictions. They may do more scavenging of winter-killed deer, for instance. In the coastal regions, they have to deal with humans at much higher densities, so they have to be much more versatile in their use of what habitat remains.
What challenges mountain lions in Southern California face as far as the road structures and areas being built out for new housing and all of that that keep chipping away at places where they can exist?
They have to cross roads to find their own place to live, and lions get killed in unacceptably high numbers on our highways.
Crossing busy highways is a huge risk for all wildlife, and some areas prove to be more problematic than others.
The Santa Ana Mountains are bordered on all sides by Los Angeles, the San Diego, Temecula area, and these animals are just surrounded by human influence. And crisscrossing this little bit of habitat they have left are these large freeways, and that really is starting to divide them.
They are becoming more and more genetically isolated, more inbred, and thereby that may change physical characteristics such as hair patterns or tails and things like that.
This artificial separation by roads and development is starting to create different genetic subgroups of mountain lions. This image reflects the genetically distinct populations in California. While these subgroups benefit from being specially adapted to their local environment, a complete lack of mixing within the species can be genetically dangerous due to inbreeding complications.
Broadly speaking, it's important that there be this mixing across California, and our studies suggest, the geneticists that we worked with, Holly Ernest and Kyle Gustafson, that the total population of mountain lions within California is divided into some distinct groups.
These groups are already showing low survival rates, and as they become more isolated, they could disappear completely.
In order to try to combat this isolation by roads and development, we are working with civil engineers and Caltrans and other highway agencies to develop plans to enhance the ability of animals to move across roads.
A healthy, flourishing California depends upon wildlife and their habitats remaining connected. As dominant species ourselves, humans can respect and preserve the fragile ecosystems shared with other apex predators. Mountain lions are territorial animals by nature. Once they reach adolescence, their instinct is to find a territory to call their own. Dispersal helps maintain a healthy and diverse gene pool, but as human populations increase, available habitat declines. And for some mountain lions, this could mean the collapse of their population. One of the greatest threats to mountain lions in Southern California is the car.
If these animals can't cross the freeway and maintain their populations, they're going to suffer in terms of decreasing population size, decreasing genetic diversity, increased risk of disease, and all of these things have the potential to wipe out a species, at least in a local area.
In the last decade, the subpopulations in Southern California have struggled. To keep a healthy population, researchers determined that every 1 to 2 years, at least one male must migrate in from another population and reproduce with the local lions. Based on combined survival rates and genetic studies, only a small percentage of migrating males have succeeded. Over the last 15 years in the Santa Ana Mountains, just one documented male has made it. Migrating to find another territory enables these animals to breed with new lions. However, when habitats are hard to reach and movement is restricted, inbreeding can occur.
So when you have inbreeding in populations, you have mating between more genetically similar animals, and what this leads to is a reduction of the overall genetic diversity in that population. And when you have reductions in genetic diversity, you lose that raw material on which natural selection can act upon. So we care about not only keeping these important members of the ecosystem in place in Southern California, but also using lessons from Southern California and these more threatened populations to inform conservation of other populations across the state of California. So we can use the genetics of the animals themselves by looking at the genetic information from their DNA, which provides sort of a fingerprint of that individual animal. And using this, we can determine animals that have migrated between different populations and look at movement across the landscapes that way.
Mountain lions are naturally wide-ranging and can survive in most areas.
There's a lot of concern about what we call corridors and maintaining connectivity between these large patches of habitat, and that's important. We definitely need those big areas of federal land or private or state land where lions can survive.
A major focus of the Nature Conservancy's efforts in the Santa Ana-Palomar linkage has actually been in ensuring that we have protected lands on either side of the highway. Making sure that our protected lands are connected is vitally important to the assurance of safe wildlife connectivity over the long term.
There are very few crossing points across I-15. One of the corridors lies within the Santa Margarita Ecological Reserve, located in Temecula, California.
We're kind of this last little bit that's undeveloped that is there for the animals to move back and forth between these two habitats. And the biggest problems we're having, especially in the last 10 years as the cities of Murrieta and Temecula have exploded, is literally having so many people so close to this corridor and wanting to interact within the corridor.
This underpass, designed to help wildlife cross the freeway, is not being used as expected.
We have people living underneath the freeway, and we have people tagging and setting fires. The humans use that at the times that the animals want to use it. They use it, late at night. It acts as an impediment for the animals. The animals don't want to interface with the humans, and if the humans are there when they're trying to get through, they can, cut off that linkage.
In Southern California, we have a limited time because the development pressures are so intense to conserve the habitats we need and to construct the wildlife crossings that are needed across these major highways to secure connectivity over the long term.
In recent years, UC Davis Wildlife Health Center has partnered with highway agencies to improve safe migration for all wildlife. On the 241 toll road, which passes through the Santa Ana mountain range, a 12-foot fence was built along a 6-mile stretch of highway.
This fencing is designed to keep wildlife off the highway. And there's also jump out points and gaps in the fence so that if an animal does get on the highway, they can find their way off of it again. But the idea is that we're trying to use this fencing to funnel animals to safe crossing areas.
Humans can also benefit from these wildlife safety corridors. The more animals that use them, the fewer vehicle collisions and potential injuries. Despite decades of conservation efforts from government agencies, development poses an increasing threat to wildlife interconnection. Only by respecting legally protected corridors can we sustain California's natural ecosystem.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you are listening to On Mountain Lions, How to Embrace Our Wild Predatory Relatives. I'm your host, Jack Ite, and we are featuring a documentary on California mountain lions, as well as indigenous stories on the ecological role of top predators, and excerpts from our interview with Beth Pratt from the National Wildlife Federation. Here's a story from the Tembe people of Brazil, living along the Maranhão and Curupi rivers. It is about the origin of the honey festival and underlines the sacred nature of the big cats, in this case the jaguars, and their role in guarding the secrets of life. This is the Tembe variation of the Tenetahara myth, the origin of the honey festival. It's contained a book by Claude Lévi-Strauss, From Honey to Ashes, Introduction to the Science of Mythology, and it's published by Harper & Row. The Tembe people are from Brazil. This is the origin of the honey festival. Once upon a time, there were two brothers. One made himself a hideout at the top of the aziwewa tree, the flowers of which the macaws used to come out and eat. He had already killed a great many birds when two jaguars appeared on the scene carrying gourds, which they filled with nectar pressed from the blossom of the tree. For several days running, the hunter watched the animals without daring to kill them. But in spite of his advice, the brother was less prudent. He shot at the jaguars without suspecting that they were invulnerable. The animals raised a storm, which shook the tree, bringing down both the hideout and its occupant, who was killed instantly. They carried off the corpse to the underworld, the entrance of which was as small as an ant hole, and they placed it on a wooden cross standing in the bright sunshine. The hero, after being changed into an ant, came to the jaguar's hut, where vessels full of honey were hanging. He learned the ritual songs, and every evening he resumed his human form and danced with the jaguars. In the daytime, he became an ant again. When he returned to his village, he told his companions of all he had seen. Here are more excerpts from the interview our host, Jessica Aldridge, did with Beth Pratt, California Regional Executive Director of the National Wildlife Federation.
Beth, today's show is about wildlife connectivity and crossings. First, let's define what is meant by these two things and what they look like.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think they're used interchangeably and they're not. Connectivity is the broader issue, right? Wildlife needs connectivity to have a future, to thrive. Crossings is a very specific solution to the connectivity problem, but there are many. And when you hear crossing, it's usually referring to one of those sort of overpasses over a freeway, with an arc and stuff. But they can come in many shapes, sizes, forms, and for many different species. But I like to use the broader term connectivity to talk about, again, the issue of what we need to address for wildlife. And then again, crossings would be one solution to.
When we think about wildlife crossings, we may think about the mountain lions or wolves. However, there are so many animals that benefit from the wildlife crossings. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, this is what, I think for most people, we think megafauna, right? How do you get the charismatic megafauna across the road? And those are the types of crossing most people are familiar with seeing, either in Banff or other areas, with the fun photos of moose and grizzly bears walking across. But crossings themselves, these structures have been built for all size, animals. One of my favorite is up here in the Sierra. It was built for the Yosemite toad on a road that they were getting mushed a lot by cars. And this is actually a ramp that actually goes on the road, and the toads go under it. But crossings can also come in sort of even weirder forms, like there are cannons, water cannons, that actually shoot salmon over dams or other obstacles to help them in their journey, of course, upstream. So it just, they're all over. There's crab crossings, turtle crossings, you name it. So it's a solution that's used for a wide variety of animal life.
And what about plants? That's another form of wildlife. Are the crossings beneficial to plants as well?
Yeah, this was eye-opening to me. So when I first started working on the Liberty Canyon crossing, which I know we'll talk about in depth, but I knew enough about wildlife crossings to get me in trouble, much like you had asked. I knew about the big megafauna ones where, elk and deer went across, but, really diving into what it takes to preserve biodiversity in the context of connectivity, it was fascinating to me that the little animals, the little guys, as I call them, lizards, birds needed it, but also plants. So, to be resilient, whether it be plants or animals, you need genetic diversity. I think we all know inbreeding's bad. It's icky. It comes with a lot of health problems if it continues. Well, that's no different for wildlife, and it's no different for plants. Plants need connectivity for seed dispersal, for genetic exchange. And if you're plopping down a 10-lane freeway in the middle of an ecosystem, you're just not facilitating any exchange. You can get some dust across the freeway, but, that's about it.
Well, I think this leads into my next question pretty well about this concept of biodiversity and, how connectivity of habitats is so crucial to sustaining biodiversity, to growing biodiversity, especially in the face of climate change issues, correct?
Yeah, and again, this is what I love about science is it changes when we know more. And I think when I was coming up 30 years ago now, over 30 years ago, and getting my degree in the biology field and starting to work in conservation, the definitive paradigm back then was you put aside a Yosemite, you put aside a wildlife refuge, and you have these islands of protected open space, and that's where the wildlife goes, and you put the people in other areas and check the box, we've saved wildlife. But wasn't right. And we now know from science that what is key to preserving not just wildlife, but ecosystems for, again, the flora and the fauna is connectivity for resiliency. And that means actually opening up our human spaces to connect these wild spaces. So it's not like you need a Yosemite on every block, but you do need to facilitate movement for plants and animals across green spaces that do come into what we think of as, or at least used to think of as off limits for the natural world, like a place like Los Angeles. Connectivity and healthy ecosystems and healthy habitats, they need this for resiliency. I was just on a talk the other night, and a friend of mine used a quote I often use too from a very non-environmental movie, World War Z with Brad Pitt, one of my favorite zombie movies because the zombies are fast. Like the zombies in The Walking Dead don't scare me. They're slow. You can usually get away from them. But fast zombies are terrifying. But Brad Pitt has a great line that I've used as well, which movement is life. And it's true. For humans, for the natural world, you do need movement. And let me give you a great example of this in California. Fire. Okay, fire is a great example. Now, fire is something that anything that lives in California has some adaptations to. Fire is part of the natural cycle. What's not part of the natural cycle, and I refuse to call them wildfires. These are not what's happening now are not wildfires. They are human-caused firestorms. And nothing can really adapt to that, mainly because you can't move. If you watch a lightning burn in Yosemite, and I've actually walked near some, and you see a squirrel on one side and, the lightning burning, the fire burning on another, or even, lightning does cause fast moving fires too, but animals have options, right? So if it burns in one place where there's no food and habitat, they're able to move, escape it, and use the food and shelter in another place. Well, look at what happened with the Woolsey fire and even more fires in the Santa Monica Mountains. 50% of the open space burned. You had even mountain lions who are adapted to, they have a great adaptation to fire. You're usually fast enough to be able to get out of the way. We had one lion in the National Park Service study, P64, who survived the fire, but likely, based on his GPS points, what we think happened is he couldn't get out of the fire zone after the fire ended because of the roads. And so he actually ended up dying, we think, of starvation and had burnt paws. So there's a great example of how the resiliency is lost because of the lack of connectivity. And then for the rest of the mountain lions, 50% of the usable open space was burnt. They don't have options to go to the next neighborhood because there's people there or there's a freeway there. So that's how it plays out in very different ways up the food chain. And then again, you can give the same examples going down to lizards and birds.
And you're talking about some examples of urban environments with the freeways and the roads. What other particular obstacles do urban environments present to wildlife connectivity?
So many. I mean, it's fascinating to me when you start thinking about connectivity. Roads, of course, a 10-lane freeway is an obvious barrier, but it's eye-opening to contemplate what are other barriers to wildlife movement and survival. Putting on too many lights in your house can disrupt bird migrations. If you have fences that don't allow wildlife to move, that block good wildlife movement through your neighborhood. That's an impediment. Human presence is an impediment in itself. What I ask people to do, and this was a journey for me too, we really need to look at the landscape and our use of it in a different way. Even things we took for granted before or we thought weren't environmentally impactful. And I'll give you a great example of this. Trails. I use trails. I love to hike. I'm mainly a hiker, but I like to mountain bike. Nobody, and I wouldn't have thought even 10 years ago, if you plop down a trail in the middle of a big open space area, if that could be impactful. But it can be very impactful to the entire ecosystem if you site it in a bad place that has repercussions. We know now from a lot of study that just the trail itself, if the wildlife, it's not even just the immediate trail they will avoid if people are on it, but then you start radiating out that they avoid areas beyond just because of a human presence in some areas. But if you're putting it in ecologically sensitive areas, and there's one trail up near me that there's a sensitive newt population, there's sensitive butterfly populations, you can look at, just like the localized extinction possibility of the mountain lions, you can look at localized extensions of newts, or, all the smaller stuff is too. So, citing trails, limiting use. I think this era of just driving and recreation without boundaries, we need to rethink, not just cars, although I think we really do have to reckon with the moral cost of driving on both people and wildlife in a way we haven't before, but also just our day-to-day activity. It's not that we stop doing things, but I think thinking about, again, do you have a light on your deck that you keep on at all nights that's impeding bird movement? Can you change that out? Are there trails maybe we close to recreation to allow for migrations or travel during sensitive times? It's a whole new rethinking of conservation.
Well, one of the things that you had mentioned to me prior to this interview that I didn't even think of, but this concept of fences. And in our urban environments where our fences butt up against each other, and create no way for the animals to move except for being in the middle of the streets.
Yeah. LA is doing some pretty progressive stuff as usual. I think, California, it's not perfect, but really on the progressive side of making way for native wildlife. And LA is leading, in my mind, California. The city of LA is doing a wildlife pilot study where they're actually looking at how could we in the future incorporate into building codes and permitting for development to take wildlife into consideration, which would be, don't put, if you have lots, you can't put the fence right against each other, because that doesn't give the wildlife passage. They just end up in the roads. I've retraced P22's likely route from the central Santa Monica Mountains to Griffith Park about a dozen times. I don't know how that cat made it across 2 freeways or any of the neighborhoods. It's really interesting, the obstacles that urban wildlife face every day. And here's a dog chasing you. Here's another area where there's fences. Here's light pollution. Dr. Travis Longcore, he has done some really groundbreaking work on how light pollution impedes connectivity. Indeed, he's mapped out how P22's likely route from the central Santa Monica Mountains right into Griffith Park was probably dictated by avoiding lights, right? Yeah, for me, I ask people, start putting on your animals' eyes, because it is eye-opening, the obstacles they face, especially in our urban environments, but also in our rural. I live really rurally, and I'm still really sensitive to what I'm doing on my property, how it might impede animal movement, again, large and small, whether it be butterflies or my local mountain lion that lives in the backyard.
What about the health of people? So how does wildlife crossings and connectivity have an effect on the health of people?
Yeah. First of all, I think I do some work in Watts, and that has just been such an incredible experience to be part of that community and hear their perspective and try to, incorporate the environmental justice angle of this. And I'd say that, folks in communities like Watts know everything about how systems like highways and freeways disconnect health of communities.
And I just want one moment though, because our listeners are from all over the United States and globally. If you can just say where Watts is.
Yeah. So Watts is, when you think about where the wildlife crossing is going and where, P22 lives in Griffith Park, and then the Santa Monica Mountains, where the wildlife crossing is going, there's a lot of open space there. But you talk about Watts and, sort of that South Central LA, they are in the middle of freeway nightmareness, right? I mean, the freeway system, just look on a map in LA, is on a scale that I don't think anywhere in the United States. I've lived in Boston, New York. They can fit in a little corner of LA. And as we know, these freeways have enormous impacts on disconnecting communities, on then health, right? Pollution, you name it, anything. And so, the connecting sort of the wildlife's plight. This hip hop artist I work with, Warren Dixon, we actually did a video called If I Was Wild. You can go to ifiwaswild.org, where he told the story of how he connected the wildlife. They're the same systematic oppression of these roadways and a lack of connectivity is what he feels like is comparable to what he and his community experience because of these freeways and other obstacles being plopped down in the middle of communities, and how it's disrupted both socially and psychologically, but also, to your point, health-wise, right? Physically, from the pollution and other things. So just the specific roadways that we're trying to address themselves have health issues. But then you get into the larger issue that if we don't preserve biodiversity and promote healthy ecosystems by promoting connectivity, and then you get into the impacts of things like climate change, fires in Colorado. Connectivity also, again, promotes resiliency in the context of impacts like climate change. And so, if I can't convince you to just love the animals and want to help them get across the road or help mountain lions have a future, I'm sure you want to have a future for yourself. So, and then if we lose wildlife species as well, because we don't have connectivity, look at human health impacts. An interesting connection, East Coast, where I grew up, the eastern panther, which is a mountain lion, went extinct. You have an overpopulation of deer there. And some scientists kind of half jokingly are saying, bring back the mountain lion, because what do you also have there? Lyme disease. Not that we don't have it in California, but much greater incidences back there. So healthy ecosystems, healthy wildlife, directly connected to our own health.
Well, thank you, Beth. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you being on today's show.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been On Mountain Lions, How to Embrace Our Wild Predatory Relatives. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at EcoJustice Radio, SoCal 350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. Project of SoCal 350. The show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer and host, myself, Jack Eit. Co-host, Jessica Aldridge. Co-host, Carrie Kim. And engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.